Ever wondered how Studio Ghibli manages to make their food so irresistible? Well, today we're going to be making these Ghibli inspired waffles from start to finish. From modeling to lighting to making customizable shaders, there's a lot of cool tactics that you'll learn along the way to help in your future projects. Hardly any Blender experience is required, so as long as you know some of the basics, you should be good. But without further ado, there's no need to burn down your kitchen making waffles when you can just burn your GPU instead. So let's get started. So you hit Shift A to add the cube, go into edit mode, and select one of the edges on the side. We're going to bevel it with Control B. Scroll on your mouse wheel to get like 2 or 3 segments, something like that is good. And we just want to scale this down a bit because the waffle quarter isn't going to be that big. The next thing you want to do is remove both the top and bottom faces because we're not going to need this when we make the waffle. We're going to have some like indentations in the middle, like where the actual squares at the waffle are. So I'm going to add some edge loops towards the edges of the model, which when we subdivide it then, it's going to be a lot crisper. Because if we subdivide it now, it's going to be very smooth, and we want it to be a lot more crisp. So when we subdivide it now, as you can see, those edges are a lot crisper. They're not like extremely smooth, as it would have been if we didn't add any edge loops there. So I want to add some edge loops that are going across the center. We can add like 4 or 5. And I'm going to be using proportional editing. I'm hitting Alt-S, and we can just taper in part of that part a little bit. So I hit O first to toggle proportional editing, and then I hit Alt-S to pull in. And we only did that for the round part of the model. Now I'm adding some more loop cuts on the back here, because we're going to manipulate that part too later. And we're going to do the Alt-S proportional editing thing again. By the way, ignore all the stuff in the background there. That was just like some other projects I was working on, so just ignore that stuff. So I shaded the model smooth. Now what I want to do is I'm Alt-S'ing the bottom of the model. And I actually use S here. And what that does is it scales up the bottom of it so that it isn't so not tapered. We want it to be tapered. So I'm also going to scale in the top of it. And that gives us a nicer looking outer edge for our waffle. Now I'm just adding some more edge loops along the curved part of the waffle. And what that's going to do is it's going to let us smooth out the model a bit more. We can move it into place a bit more. Add some more edge loops there. So I added another edge loop at the top, and I'm just scaling it in a bit. And now what I did is I extruded the bottom edge loop of the model, and I scaled it in a bit. And what that does is it gives us a nice base. It has like a curve that goes down. Once again, when you're doing this, make sure you're looking at a lot of pictures of waffles. That's how I knew what to do here. It's extremely important to do that because otherwise you're not going to know what you're doing. A lot of beginners make this mistake. They try and like model things without looking at any reference, but reference when it comes to art is the key to like literally everything. So now I'm just doing some more small edits with proportional editing. As you can see, the edges here, I'm manipulating them a bit. And so yeah, that's basically it for the first part. Now we have to add the actual waffle squares, or whatever the hell they're called. So now what we want to do is add a displacement modifier, and the reason we're adding this is because we want to add some variation to the outer edge of the waffle. So add the displacement modifier, make a new image texture, and add a clouds texture here, and change the size of it to be a lot smaller. And yeah, now you can change the actual strength. We put it to like negative 0.32, but you can put it to whatever you want, whatever looks good, that's the main point. And so yeah, you can just keep on playing around with that as you want, until you get some look that you like, but it just has to be more varied than just like a completely smooth model. So add a plane, and this is going to be our actual waffle squares object. Scale it down a bit. Now I want you to select everything, hit ES, and then scale it out a bit. Now what you want to do is just select all the outer vertices and bring them up a bit. As you can see here, I'm doing that. And ultimately I get a shape like this. And delete the face at the top because we want to make this like an actually like a hollow object. And you can scale it all in Y to make it more of a rectangular shape, which is what we want. Now add some loop cuts going around the edges with Control R and select the center one, and using proportional editing, you can hit Alt-S and sort of drag it so that it becomes more curvy. And I tested here using different types of fall off for the proportional editing. I tested sphere and sharp, but neither of them really did the trick, so I ultimately just stuck to smooth. So we got something like this. And yeah, just edit it until it looks like something that you want it to look like. So add a loop cut going down the center and from right to left as well. Now what we want to do is we want to add some sort of actual border around the top of it. So if you hit ES on the top loops, and then you do Control R, add like maybe like 5 segments in between to the top. You can alt click on the edge in the middle, and then using proportional editing, drag that up a bit. And then yeah, you just have to adjust it until it looks like something you like. As you can see, it's a little bit too sharp here. So what I did was I just GG. I alt clicked on the edges here and I hit GG to edge slide them. So now you want to add an array modifier. Set the count to whatever you like. We can change all of this later. I set the relative offset to -1 in X, then hit Shift D when you're hovering over the array, and you'll get another one, and just change the settings so that in Y it says 1, and now you have a grid. So now we're going to add another modifier. We're going to add a displace modifier, and if you play around with the strength you can see. So we're going to add a new texture, and this time, let's name it Waffles. We'll set it to Clouds texture once again. Change the scale a bit, and as you can see that adds a little bit of variation. If you play with the strength you can see how it's kind of like breaking the objects a bit. So scale that down a bit and bring it more towards the center. So ultimately what we're going to want to do with this is place it inside of this waffle exterior somehow. And the way we're going to do that is by using a Boolean. So first of all, I'm just going to position the waffle squares to be a little bit inside and outside of the waffle exterior, and we're going to want to create what's called the Boolean intersection. So add a cube, bevel the side like we did before to get it to kind of match the waffle exterior. Now you can scale that down and just try and get it to encapsulate the interior part of the waffle. So if we add a Boolean modifier to the waffle squares and we click on intersect, switch the solver to fast and click on the object we just made. Now as you can see, if we go into viewport settings and we switch this to wire, we can see that the waffle squares are now inside of this Boolean object. It's intersecting with it. So if we take the waffle squares and we move them in a bit more, we'll get it like this, which is what we want. Now obviously we need to clean this up a lot. So you can manipulate the Boolean object as you please. You can try scaling it and doing all these things. Just try and get it to better fit the actual shape that we're trying to get here. So maybe pull that up a bit. Move the vertices around so that it isn't intersecting weirdly. And now from here we're just playing around with it to try to get it to look good. And yeah, so at this point when we're refining, I recommend putting on a documentary or something in the background or some music, because at this point it gets a bit repetitive. At this point I was kind of really just trying all sorts of different things to get it to look good. Like I literally tried adding like new loop cuts here and manipulating the vertices of the Boolean intersection object. As you can see here, I used a subdivision surface modifier to try and get it to be smoother. And now as I progress, it's starting to look a bit better. Ultimately, after we finish, we're going to add an empty plain axis, and what this is going to be is just for the sake of making things to work a bit better, we're going to parent everything to this axis, this empty, so that when we move the empty, everything else will move as well, because we have a lot of objects right here. We have a Boolean and like this and that, so to make things a bit easier, all we have to do now is just move the empty around and everything else moves with it. So as you can see here, I'm just adding some finishing touches on the Boolean to get it to be better, adding some edge loops. You don't have to get this part perfect, which is good, because once we add the shader and everything, it'll compensate for whatever oddities we have. Alright guys, so now what we're going to do is actually start duplicating this around so that we could get the full waffle shape. So as you can see, I'm just selecting everything, hitting Shift D to duplicate it around. And now what you want to do is just select your empty parent and start rotating them a bit so that everything becomes a circular type of shape. So as you can see, I'm clicking on it, I'm just hitting like R and then typing in 90 to get a 90-degree flip. And yeah, so now they're starting to get in place a bit. Alright, so now I'm just making some basic adjustments here. So what I'm doing here is I'm going to add a sunlight, and so what that's going to do is going to set up the scene so that we're now ready to make the shader pretty soon. Okay guys, so first we're going to click new on the material slot and delete the principled BSDF. Now hit Shift A and add a diffuse BSDF. Add a shader to RGB after that, and then a color ramp after that. Now what this lets us do is it gives us the basic tune shader that we're going to use. So if you switch to constant, then you can see we could pull the handles and it looks like this. And now we can switch the colors to whatever we want. Alright, so the next part is going to be to add a gradient texture, because we want it to be darker on the bottom and lighter on the top. So if you hit Control T on the gradient texture, you could get the mapping and texture coordinates. If you shift click on the gradient texture, then you can see what it's actually doing. As you can see right now, it's this gradient, but we're going to rotate it 90 and Y so that it goes from top to bottom. And if you move the X location, you can see it goes up and down, which is exactly what we want. What I'm also going to do is click on both the waffle squares and the outside, and I'm going to hit link materials so that now they both have this material. Now what we can do is we're going to add a map range node after that, and what that lets us do is it lets us manipulate the darkness and the brightness a bit easier. So we want to combine this tune shader with this gradient, and the way we're going to use that is by using a mix node. So if you plug in the gradient as the factor, the A values are going to be the darker ones and the B values are going to be the lighter ones. So all we have to do is plug in the tune shader to both the A and B, So the whole thing is just the tune shader, nothing has changed. But if we plug in a hue saturation value to the A, and then we darken it, what it's going to do is it's going to actually add the gradient in, because what it's doing is it's saying, okay, like in the darker areas of the top to bottom gradient, we want it to be a darker version of the tune shader, and that's what's happening over here. And then in the B value, it's just the regular tune shader, the regular brightness. So if we change the map range to step linear, what we'll get is this actually tune shaded type of gradient. So we can adjust the step, and what that will do is it'll give us a nicer transition, a more like anime style transition, and that's exactly what we want. So now here I'm just playing around a bit with the location values. You can set it to whatever you want as long as it looks good, that's the main thing. Now I'm going to drag out here and add a hue saturation value after that, just for the sake of adjusting the color a little bit. So we can adjust the saturation as we want, and the value as well. Now I want to add a reflection to the whole thing, so we're going to use a glossy BSTF, which is the metallic type of shader. Set the roughness to something low so it's more reflective. And we're going to add another shader to RGB here to make it into a tune shader. Bring out the color ramp and switch it to constant, and now what we have is a mask that we can use as the reflection. First, what I want to do is I want to mask the reflection so that it's only on the top part of the waffles. I don't want it to be on the side or the bottom. So look what I'm doing right now. I'm using this gradient that we made earlier, and I'm moving it up a bit so that you see in that black part there's going to be no reflection, but in the white part there is going to be reflection. So then what we want to do is drag out a mix node again, and this time we're going to switch it to multiply and drag that in. And now what we got is something where it's reflective on the top, but the sides are excluded from the reflection mask. So now if we add a mix node again, and we use this output as our mask, we can have it so the black part is the normal tune shader and then the white part is the reflection part. So if we just set it to white, as you can see in that area it's going to be a white color because it's in the B slot. Remember, A is for black and B is for white. So if we add a hue saturation value after all that, we can make some final adjustments to the shader here. So now what I'm doing, I'm selecting all the other objects and I'm just linking the materials to them, so that now they all have this material. So here I'm just changing the values a little bit to what I used in my original animation. So now what I'm doing here is I'm adding a bit of variation to the gradient. Right now, it's just a flat gradient from top to bottom, and what I want to do is kind of add noise to it a little bit. So this is a method where you add a mix node in between the gradient texture and the mapping, and then you put a noise texture as the V value. And basically this is just a common setup in stylized shaders, and what it does, as you can see here, if you play around with the scale, it's affecting the parts where the black meets the white in the gradient. So at those like intersection areas, it kind of just messes it up. It makes it a bit jittery. So that's what we're doing here. And here I'm just making some final adjustments to our hue saturation value that we had at the beginning. The great thing about procedural texturing is it's just so changeable. You can change whatever the hell you want. So yeah, just make adjustments here. As you can see here, it's really cool. You can change it as you want. One thing I want to do is I want to select all of these square waffle objects, and I want to link their object data. Now the reason why I want to do that is because then if we go into edit mode and we adjust one, now you see they all adjust. If you move the vertices around on one of them, all of the other ones are also going to move around, and that's just going to let us edit things a bit easier in the future. So as you can see here, if you scale it down, it'll change things a bit. We're going to adjust this a bit more later, but for now we'll keep it as is. Alright, so what I want to do now is add a cube. What this is going to be is we're going to add some syrup inside of the crevices of the waffle squares. So bevel the edge like that so we get a similar shape. And as you can see here, what we're doing is we're filling it with syrup like that. The gray is going to become a liquid. So just adjust the edges with proportional editing to get it to fit into place. So add a new material, delete the principal BSTF. And what we're going to add is a color ramp node. And actually I forgot to add the diffuse BSTF first. So add that first, then drag out the shader to RGB. And this gives us our basic tune shader. So slide the values like this, set it to constant. Choose a beige type of color. You can shade it smooth if you want. And I hit Control 1 here to add, what do you call it, subdivision surface modifier. And what that does is it smooths it out a bit, and we can adjust it more from there. If we drag this out to a transparent BSDF, switch it to alpha blend. As you can see now, it looks a bit more transparent, but it's way too viscous right now, so we're gonna have to change that. Add another mix shader, and we're going to mix it with another transparent BSDF to make it even more transparent. And this way, we can now drag it around the FAC value, and as you can see, it changes how transparent it's going to be. So now I'm just adjusting it a bit, trying to make sure that it's actually in between each of the crevices. So actually you have to set the shadow mode to alpha clip, and what that will do is it'll affect the transparency to be a little bit less. It's not really that important of a detail, but I just did that here. So now what I'm doing is I'm just shift D'ing all of the syrup that goes inside, and I'm placing it on all of the other quadrants of the waffle. So what I'm going to do now is adjust the edges of the waffle squares a little bit. I want to make them to be a bit less thick. So as you can see here, I'm doing that a bit. You have to play around with it a bit lot. It's going to be a bit funky at first, but you'll get there if you keep on playing around with it. See, I'm just selecting the edge loops and I'm hitting S with proportional editing on to scale it up. Now what I want to do is I want to add this plate object. You guys can get it if you download the file for free in the description. Now what I'm doing is I'm Shift D duplicating everything and putting it down a bit, because I want to have another layer of waffles, which makes it look a little bit better. And I rotated it a bit so it isn't exactly parallel to everything else. Alright, so now what we're doing is we're going to add the chocolate syrup. So if you add a path curve and you go into the settings for the geometry, you can turn on bevel. And what this does is it gives us a bit of a circularness to the object. And from there, you know, you can kind of move it around and position it as you like. If you hit Alt S on any part of it, it'll scale it down, and Alt S to scale it up as well. So that's how you make it thinner and thicker. But as you can see here, I'm just positioning it into place because we want it to sort of like droop all around the waffles, right? Like as if someone took a bottle of chocolate syrup and just like started squirting it like all over. For the material, click on new. It's going to be extremely simple. So just add a diffuse BSTF, drag that out. We're going to add a tune shader once again, add a color ramp, and set it to be a brownish color. Now we're going to add a glossy BSDF and do the same thing. This is going to be for the reflection of the chocolate syrup. We're going to add a nice white reflection to it. So add a mix node, and it's literally the same thing as we did before with the waffle. You just use the gradient as a mask. Now for the sake of saving time, I'm just going to get back to the video when the rest of the chocolate syrup is added. So I'm going to show you my original model when I first made this animation, and then we're going to continue from there. Now here's what it looks like with all of the chocolate added. You see over here, the reason these are raised is because in my final model, when I added the whipped cream and the bananas, I ended up having to put it under the chocolate syrup. So you'll see later why I did that. So I also added these chocolate kisses. Basically, the shader is extremely simple. It's literally the same, almost the same as we did for the chocolate syrup, except I use slightly different colors. And also, if you want to see what the geometry looks like, it looks like that. Literally just a circle that I extruded up and then tapered. If you can make the other stuff I made in this video, then you can definitely make that. So the next thing we want to do is add some maple syrup that's going off the side. So I'm adding a plane here, positioning it at the edge, and we want to make it as if it's like drooping off the side. So as you can see here, I'm just repositioning it. I want to get it to have this like wavy effect, where part of it is tapered in more and part of it is tapered out more. So here I'm just modeling it a bit. As you can see, I'm scaling in and scaling out with S. And you want to make it to have the effect like it's falling onto the plate. So as you can see here, trying to make it like it's forming a puddle on the plate. So I hit Control 1 to subdivide it to just make it a bit smoother so it isn't so blocky, and now I'm just making some adjustments. So what I did here was I linked the material with the syrup that was in the crevices, and now what I'm going to do is copy over this material here. It's basically the exact same thing as the material for the crevices, except the difference is I added a thing here to just add some reflections. It's just a glossy BSDF like we did before. And now what I'm doing here is I'm duplicating the puddle so that it looks like it's pooling more, so it gets a bit thicker. I duplicated the vertices there, and as you can see, I'm scaling them a bit. And then you can just position it as you like. You don't need to separate it from the rest of the object, so yeah, you can just keep it all in one object. And as you can see here, just make changes as you like. And now you can just duplicate the whole object, and putting your 3D cursor at the center, hit R, and then just start rotating them around. So this is how it looked in the end. As you can see, some of them I tapered a bit more, like this one here, just to give it some variation, like this one is fatter, for example. So now what we want to do is add the banana slices. So we're going to add a cylinder, maybe just add a loop cut in the center, and scale it down a bit, so that it becomes more of a slice. Be sure to add a subdivision modifier to it, so it becomes a bit more flat, or a bit more rounded, sorry. And then you can add a displace after that as well. To make the top a bit better, I'm just going to add an inset with the I key to it, and scale it in a bit. So remember to do that as well. And now we're going to do the displace modifier. So set it to like 0.3 strength, just turn it down a lot, and then we have to add our actual texture. Set the texture to clouds and just scale it up a bit. So now we get some nice displacement. So it isn't just like a perfectly even banana peel. But now it's time for me to show you guys how to make the shader for this. It's extremely simple, similar to like everything else we did with shader wise in this video. One thing I have to show you though is this painted texture that I added here. If you want to know how to make an image texture, you just type an image texture here, click on new, make sure you check alpha, and just title it whatever you want. And then if you go to texture paint mode, what you can do is, well, first let's just make sure that our viewer node is looking at the texture, so shift click on it, go to texture paint mode, and now if you draw something with the draw brush, you can see you can draw a mask right here. But I already drew the mask. As you can see right here is the mask that I drew. and then I made it constant using the map range node like we did before with the step, and then I just combined that with the base tune shader, and then from there we were able to get something that looks like this, where it has a dark center. So after you're done making that, just duplicate all the banana slices around. And as you can see here, I literally just hit Shift D and then rotated them all about and put it under the chocolate syrup. Now what we want to do is add the whipped cream. So the method to making this is actually really interesting. It's literally just a sphere that we rotate a bit and scale it a bit on Y maybe, just to make it a bit more elongated. So now what we want to do is add a displacement modifier. Set the strength down a bit, click on new for texture. We're going to set it to object coordinates this time, and we're going to add an empty to be the object that displaces it. So set the object to the whipped cream empty that we just created. By the way, if you don't know how to rename objects, you hit F2. Now go to the textures menu, and we're going to use wood this time, and it gives us these bands. As you can see, if we move it around, it changes because we're using the object, the whipped cream empty, as our displacement object, so it's all relative to that. Now if we change it to bands noise, we can change the noise of the texture. So we can shade that smooth. And as you can see, it looks a bit whipped. Now we're gonna make the shader. This is like extremely simple. So if you made the rest of the shaders in this video, there's really no explanation that's even needed for this. Just a basic tune shader. With one thing here is I set the shadow color to be very yellow, because that's a thing in whipped cream for some reason. So yeah, make sure you do that. And now you just have to try and get it to look the way you want by duplicating it around and scaling the object, and also scaling the empty object, because they all affect each other. The empty object will control the scale factor of the texture that we're using. So that's why you have to be careful. So now what we want to do is add a solidify outline. So go to the materials tab, add a new slot, click on new, and type in outline or whatever you want to name it. Make sure you move it up with the up arrow key on the right side so that it's on top of material.007. And now just add an RGB node and set it to black. Plug it into surface, and now this is going to be the outline color. So go to the solidify modifier, set offset to 1, and check flip. Material offset you can set to -100. Then from there what we have to do is turn on backface culling for the material, and you should be good. Now as you can see, if you move it around, it's a pretty funny looking effect. So yeah, from there just duplicate them around, play around with it, and get it to look good. Once again, if you're having any issues, just download the file and you'll be good from there, because you can actually look into my file and see what exact settings I use for what thing. And yeah, so I'm just positioning it under the chocolate syrup right here. And yeah, so in the end, here's what it looked like for me. I did add some chocolate kisses to the top of it, so you can do that as well if you want. And so yeah guys, that wraps it up. For those of you guys who have a passion for stylized art and maybe don't know what steps you should take next to level up, I can actually help you one-on-one with whatever it is you need. It's in my community called Stylized Kitchen. In this community, you can ask me literally whatever you want about art in Blender, and I'll be there to help you out or alleviate whatever headache you have. For example, one of my members was having trouble making these types of objects here, so I made a file for him explaining a rough approach on how to do it. Another member was asking about fog and ground fog and how to do that, so I made a file showing him a basic approach on how to do that as well. I'm like ChatGPT but for Blender. But you'll also get access to my stylized animation tutorials and add-ons, like this course for example that goes from start to finish on how to make this sunflower animation. And I have many more to come as well. Like right now I'm working on a course that's about how to actually approach your own projects and make things from scratch. The Discord is on my Patreon, so you can check out stylizedkitchen.io to check out more information about it. But that's about it. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you learned a lot from this video. It's definitely like the longest video I've ever uploaded, and more is to come, so thank you for watching.